The fluorescent lights inside the small family clinic in Santa Rosa buzzed quietly overhead. It was nearing closing time. Outside, dusk had begun its quiet descent, the California sky fading from amber to blue-gray, casting long shadows over the sidewalk and clinic windows. Inside, the scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of a printer spitting out the last prescriptions of the day. Dr. Evan Lamb, 52, sat behind his desk, flipping through a chart, the room around him still and clinical. He was a well-respected family physician known not just for his quiet professionalism, but for his presence in the neighborhood, block barbecues, holiday lights, polite nods from his porch. The kind of man who made a point to remember not just his patients' names, but their dogs' names too. He glanced at the clock, 6:41 p.m. One final chart, and he could lock up. But then, as he stepped out into the hallway, something caught his eye. A man and a girl sat quietly in the corner of the waiting room. The man, stocky, mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing a blue polo shirt, stood when he saw the doctor. "Evan," he said, flashing a polite smile. "Didn't know you were still seeing patients this late." "Marco," Dr. Lamb returned the smile, "you're neighbors. Of course I'll see you." Then he looked at the girl. Red hoodie, shoulders hunched, eyes glued to the floor. She didn't look up. "This is my daughter," Marco added. "Lucia." Lucia barely acknowledged him, just a slight tilt of her head, still not a glance upward. Dr. Lamb offered a warm nod. "Good to meet you, Lucia." She said nothing. Back in the examination room, Nurse Rosa Delgado was already preparing the table. She leaned in quietly. "There's something strange about that father and daughter," she said in a hushed voice. "He wouldn't let her speak, wouldn't even let her say her name." Lamb paused, arching an eyebrow. "She wouldn't make eye contact either," Rosa continued. "Not once, just stared at the floor." He sighed. "Marco's always been a bit traditional. Strict." Rosa shook her head. "This isn't cultural, doctor. This is something else." She handed him Lucia's chart. 14 years old. Pregnancy symptoms. Lamb stared at the page a long moment. "Send them in," he finally said. The door creaked open, and Marco walked in with a firm hand pressed to Lucia's shoulder, guiding her like a chess piece. She moved stiffly, as though her limbs belonged to someone else. The hoodie hung loose over her frame, the sleeves tugged down over her knuckles. "She's been having abdominal pain," Marco began, taking the seat beside her. "And nausea, morning sickness, fatigue." Lamb didn't respond immediately. He looked at Lucia. "Lucia, would you prefer to answer for yourself?" She nodded slightly. No words. "How far along do you think you are?" the doctor asked gently. Before she could respond, Marco cut in. "She has a boyfriend. That's all we're going to say about that." Lamb kept his gaze on Lucia. "Lucia, I'd like to do an ultrasound, just to check on the baby. Is that okay?" She nodded. Still no eye contact. The lights dimmed slightly as Rosa adjusted the examination lamp. The room fell quiet, save for the soft rustle of the paper sheet as Lucia lay back. The machine beeped as it powered on, the cool gel slick against her belly. She winced. "That hurt?" Rosa asked gently. Lucia nodded. Lamb moved the transducer slowly across her stomach, eyes scanning the flickering image on the monitor. He stopped. His breath caught. The shape on the screen was unmistakable, a fetus, nearly fully formed. But there was something else. Something wrong. "Lamb?" Rosa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lamb's voice was flat, professional, but strained. "She's 28 weeks. Marco stiffened. "That can't be right. It hasn't been that long." Lamb frowned. "The fetus is small, growth is restricted, and there's an irregular heartbeat." Rosa's eyes widened. Lamb turned back to Marco. "You need to take her to the hospital now. She needs advanced care." Marco hesitated. "Can't you just prescribe something?" "Number. She needs fetal monitoring, Doppler studies, oxygen flow assessments." "I can't do that here." Marco scowled but took the prescription offered. "I'll go to the pharmacy. You finish up with her." He left the room. The door clicked softly shut. Rosa wiped away the gel, trying to meet Lucia's eyes. "You're going to be okay, sweetie." Lucia's voice came out small, barely audible. She kicks when she hears his voice, she whispered. I hate that she likes him. Rosa froze. So did Lam. What do you mean by that? He asked carefully. But Lucia didn't answer. She was gone again, retreated inside. The moment had passed. Later, as Dr. Lamb drove home, he passed the Halkin house. Their car was already in the driveway. They hadn't gone to the hospital. He parked at his own home just 3 houses down and sat in silence. Lucia's words still playing in his head. She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him. There was something wrong. He could feel it in the quiet, in the way she'd never looked up. And in the ultrasound image still etched into his mind, the grainy black and white silhouette of a baby fighting to grow, tucked inside the silence of a girl who didn't speak. A girl who wouldn't look up. Santa Rosa was the kind of town that made people feel safe without thinking too hard about why. Tucked in the folds of Sonoma County, it was a place of tree-lined avenues, tidy lawns, and mailboxes with decorative flags. Neighbors smiled at each other over fences. Kids rode bicycles to school without helmets, weaving between sprinklers and sidewalk chalk. It was suburbia in its most digestible form, comfortable, sunny, and ordinary. But the Halkin house had always been a little quiet. 3 houses down from Dr. Evan Lamb's 2-story colonial, the Halkin home looked the same as the others: beige siding, a 2-car garage, a wreath on the front door even when it wasn't a holiday. But there was something about it that gave pause if you stood in front of it too long. The blinds were always drawn. No toys in the yard, no dog barking from inside. It was the kind of quiet that didn't belong to peace. It belonged to control. Dr. Lamb sat at his kitchen table that evening, untouched dinner cooling on the plate before him. He was still in his white coat, tie loosened. The house around him was still, the ticking of the clock louder than usual. Outside, the air was thickening into fog, a typical coastal evening for this part of California. But his mind wasn't on the weather. It was on Lucia, and on the way she flinched when her father touched her shoulder, and on the sentence she whispered, fragile and loaded with dread. She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him. He replayed the moment again, and again. Not just the words, but her face pale, withdrawn, almost absent. And yet there had been a flicker of something when Marco left the room, a crack in the surface. That had been the moment, and he had almost missed it. The next morning, sunlight fell through the living room windows like golden smoke. Birds chirped on the fence posts, and the world outside resumed its rhythms. School buses wheezed by. Coffee machines sputtered to life across the neighborhood. Marco Halkin's SUV was still parked in the driveway, unmoved. Lam stood in front of his window, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching. Lucia hadn't gone to the hospital. He'd known it last night, but seeing the car still parked sealed the suspicion in his chest like concrete. Down at the clinic, Rosa greeted him with her usual clipboard and cautious eyes. Any word from them? She asked. Number. He shook his head. Didn't expect any either. Rosa exhaled. I couldn't sleep last night. That girl, the way she talked. That wasn't just a scared teenager. Oh, Lam nodded. Number it wasn't. He paused, then made a decision. I'm going to look them up, he said. See what I can find. Rosa raised a brow. Isn't that not exactly protocol? I know. He turned and walked toward his office, unlocking the door and flicking on the desk lamp. The screen of his laptop blinked to life. He opened Facebook. It felt like crossing a line, but the urgency of the feeling in his gut was stronger than his professional reservations. Searched Marco Halkin, Santa Rosa. A profile appeared almost instantly, public enough. Lots of pictures: Marco grilling at a cookout, Marco at a car show, Marco standing in front of a deer carcass holding a crossbow. But something strange stood out. In the last 2 years, there were almost no photos of Lucia. Only one. A blurry picture of her in a red hoodie, clearly taken from a distance. The caption, Lucia's growing up so fast. That was it. No mother tagged. No other family. Just Marco. And silence. Curious, Lam clicked through Marco's friend list. A name stood out, Daniela Rivera. He clicked her profile. It was set to public. She was in several older photos with Marco, dating back over a decade. Then, nothing. Her last post was a stock image of a candle with the words, "Light always finds its way through," beneath it. He hovered his mouse over the message button, then clicked. "Hello, Ms. Rivera. I'm Dr. Evan Lamb, a physician at the Santa Rosa Family Clinic. I believe we may have a mutual connection. I'd like to ask about your daughter, Lucia. I understand this may be unexpected, but it's important. Please respond when you're able." He sat back, exhaling. His hands were shaking. The reply came just before lunch. "Lucia, is something wrong? I haven't seen her in over 3 years. Marco has full custody. Why are you asking me about her?" That message stopped everything. He stared at it, not blinking. Before he could type a reply, another message came through. Then a call. It was Daniela. He answered. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Dr. Lamb? What's happening? You said something about Lucia? Is she okay?" "She was in my clinic yesterday," he explained, his tone calm but measured. "Marco brought her in. She's pregnant, 28 weeks. There was a long silence. Then a broken sound. "No," Daniela's voice cracked. "No, that can't be. She's severely underweight. The baby has growth issues. She's not getting proper care. I haven't been allowed near her," Daniela whispered. "Not since the court gave him custody. He told the judge I was unstable, that I was a threat to her." Lamb closed his eyes. "He said you took her to the hospital last night, that you'd met them there." "I haven't seen her," Daniela said. "I haven't heard her voice in 3 years." There was a beat of silence. Then a sob. "My baby." By mid-afternoon, the weight of the situation had tipped Lamb into action. He called a friend at the police department, an officer he'd treated for a shoulder injury 6 months back. Discreetly, he asked for advice, explained the vague suspicions, the lack of evidence. "Sounds like you're on the edge of something serious," the officer said. "But unless the girl confirms there's a threat or gives you physical evidence, we can't intervene. Not without probable cause." "Aye? What if I get something?" Lamb asked. "Then call 911. Click." That evening, after darkness fell and the neighborhood grew still, Dr. Lamb walked past the Halkin home again. The lights inside were on, the windows still covered. He hesitated, then walked up the path and knocked. It took a moment, but the door opened. Lucia stood in the doorway. She wasn't supposed to. She wasn't supposed to be the one answering. The look in her eyes said that. "Lucia," he said softly, "did you go to the hospital?" She shook her head. He leaned in. "Lucia, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you okay?" She glanced over her shoulder. Inside, the television buzzed. Footsteps. "Who is it?" Marco's voice boomed. Lucia flinched. "It's the doctor," she called back. "I just wanted to check on you," Lamb said quickly. "The baby's condition. It worried me." Marco appeared behind her. His smile was thin. "Dr. Lamb, you're quite persist. She needs care," Lamb said evenly. "You know that." Marco nodded. "Tomorrow, we'll go first thing." Lamb looked past him toward the hallway, the shadows, the silence. Something felt wrong. Not vague anymore. Not uncertain. Tangibly wrong. Then Lucia did something unexpected. She slipped something into his hand. A folded piece of paper. No several. Photos. She didn't say anything. Just pressed them into his palm and closed the door. Back home, Lamb turned on the lamp over his desk, unfolded the images. He froze. The photos were dark, blurry, but unmistakable. Lucia, on a bed, posed, and Marco, in the frame, his hand on her, his face close to hers. 4 photos, maybe 5. Lamb couldn't breathe. He picked up his phone and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? "I need to report child abuse," he said. "Immediate danger. I have evidence." "I'm Slee." By the time the squad cars turned onto the street, headlights dimmed, sirens off, Dr. Lamb had scanned the photos into his laptop, sent copies to Daniela, and locked the originals in a drawer. He stood in the driveway waiting, coat wrapped tightly around him, fog curling at his ankles. When the officers arrived, he handed them the evidence. They didn't ask unnecessary questions. They knew what they were looking at. Within minutes, they moved toward the Halkin house, flashlights out, formations quiet, tight, professional. Across the street, lights flicked on in neighbors' windows. Curtains parted. It was about to begin. Something that had been happening for years, silently, horrifically, was about to end. Fog rolled low across the suburban street like a blanket drawn too tight. In Santa Rosa, the kind of stillness that once soothed now felt like an omen. Porch lights flickered on one by one, and the hush of midnight was replaced by whispers behind glass, neighbors waking, watching, not yet knowing. 3 police cruisers moved in with surgical precision, headlights dim, no sirens. Their presence was not meant to scare, but to trap a quiet perimeter wrapped around a house that had kept its secrets too long. From the curb, Dr. Evan Lamb stood still, a man out of place in his own neighborhood, clutching a USB drive with scanned images that turned his stomach. The originals were locked in his desk drawer, but the weight of them still pressed on him like a physical force. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't a hero. He was just a doctor, and now, the only witness who had seen enough to act. A female officer approached him. "You're the reporting party?" "Yes, I'm the physician who examined the girl. Lucia Halcon, M." He nodded. "She's 14, 28 weeks pregnant. The father, Marco Halcon, is also, I believe—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The officer nodded grimly. "You gave us copies of the photos?" "Yes." She passed them to me discreetly. The officer motioned toward the lead detective, a tall man in a Kevlar vest with a calm, hardened face. "That's Detective Morales. He'll brief you in a moment. We're going in." Inside the Halcon house, the lights were still on. Someone was awake. Detective Morales and 3 officers approached the front door. Another team moved around the back, stepping softly through dew-damp grass. 2 more covered the sides of the house. Morales knocked, firm, sharp. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "Santa Rosa Police Department," he called out. "Mr. Halcon, please open the door." Still nothing. But behind the frosted glass, shadows shifted. Movement. A pause. Possible evasion, Morales muttered into his radio. Then, suddenly upstairs, a light turned off. "Back team. Eyes on the second floor," Morales ordered. An officer at the rear confirmed. 2 figures approaching attic window. And then voices. A scuffle. Another voice shouted from inside. "On the roof." "He's going out the attic window." Morales bolted back from the porch. From his vantage, he could see it clearly now. Marco Halcon crouched on the sloped roof above the garage, dragging someone behind him. Lucia, barefoot, in pajamas, belly swollen under a thin cotton shirt, her wrists caught in his grip like she was nothing more than cargo. "Stay back," Marco shouted down at the police. "You come up here, I swear to God I'll jump with her." Lucia cried out, "Please help me." Her voice, raw and sharp, cut through the night air like broken glass. Within seconds, the front lawn turned into a command zone. Officers rushed to deploy an inflatable airbag at the base of the roof. One called for paramedics. Another coordinated a tactical climb to the upper story. "Talk to him," Morales instructed. "Keep him focused." And then Lamb stepped forward. Against orders. Against protocol. But not against instinct. "Marco," Lamb called out. "It's Dr. Lamb." On the roof, Marco froze. "I just want to talk." "You had no right," Marco roared. "You were supposed to be a doctor, not a rat. She's not safe, Marco. She needs care. You know it." Marco's grip on Lucia tightened. "She's mine," he growled. "You don't understand. She's all I have." Behind him, officers slowly emerged from the attic window, inching forward with restraint. Lucia's eyes were wild, scanning the air below. The officers, the bag being inflated, her mother. Wait. Another car screeched to a halt beyond the police tape. A woman leapt out. "Lucia, end." It was Daniela. Her voice tore through the street like a siren of its own. Lucia looked down, her body tensing. "Mom." Daniela fought against an officer's grip, screaming. "Let me go! That's my daughter!" Lucia burst into tears. Her hands went to her stomach instinctively. "I'm scared." "She hears your voice," Lam said gently to Daniela. "Talk to her. Keep her calm." Daniela stepped forward. Her voice softened, even through panic. "Lucia, baby, I'm here. Mommy's here." "M?" "Tell her I'm not a monster," Marco shouted. "Tell her this is your fault. You left." Daniela looked up at him. "I may have left, but I didn't do this. You did." It hit him like a slap. The truth in it. And in that hesitation, just one breath of stillness, the officers at the attic window made their move. Marco saw them too late. With a scream of desperation, he pushed Lucia forward. But she was ready. She twisted, slipped from his grip, and fell backwards toward the airbag. The street held its breath. A soft thump. She landed. Alive. Paramedics rushed in. Marco turned to run, but the officers were already on him. He lunged toward the edge of the roof, but a knee caught him in the ribs mid-motion. He hit the shingles hard, face twisted in rage. "You rewind everything!" he screamed at Lam below. Then the handcuffs snapped shut. On the ground, Lam was already at Lucia's side. Paramedics checked her vitals, lifting her gently to a stretcher. "I'm her physician," Lam explained quickly. "She's 28 weeks, intrauterine growth restriction, fetal heartbeat irregular." One paramedic nodded. "We've got this. You coming with us?" "Yes." Lucia's hand clutched his as they loaded her into the ambulance. "Where's my mom?" she asked weakly. "I'm here, baby," Daniela called, climbing into the back beside her. "I've got you now." Lam took the last seat. As the doors closed, the sirens began, not panicked, not rushed. Just urgent. Just right. The hospital glowed against the night like a safe haven. Inside, a trauma team waited neonatal specialists, OB-GYNs, nurses in pastel scrubs with ready hands and serious eyes. They wheeled Lucia in fast, hooked monitors to her belly, took blood samples, started an IV. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the attending physician, moved with clinical calm. "Severe malnutrition," she noted. "Dehydration, blood pressure unstable. Fetal heart is irregular but present. She looked at Lam. "Thank you for bringing her in. She's still in danger, but you bought us time." Lam nodded silently. He'd never been prouder or more horrified in his life. Outside, in a quiet hallway, Daniela sat on a bench, shaking. Lam sat beside her. "I thought he was just strict," she said. "I thought. Maybe he was lonely. But this, you couldn't have known." She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "But you did." "I didn't know," Lam said. "But I listened." She nodded slowly. "That's more than anyone else did." Back in Lucia's room, soft beeping filled the silence. She was pale, but her breathing had steadied. She looked up as her mother entered. Daniela reached for her hand. "I'm here." Lucia didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held on, to the woman she hadn't seen in 3 years, to the life growing inside her, to the first night in years she could sleep without fear of the man behind the door. Downstairs, Detective Morales took Lam's statement. He wrote it carefully, completely, each detail clear, from the first ultrasound to the rooftop confrontation. He turned to Lam after it was done. "You did the right thing." Lam nodded, then added quietly, "It didn't feel like enough." Morales looked toward the pediatric wing. It was. Later that night, long past midnight, the streets of Santa Rosa were still. Marco Halkin sat in a holding cell, head down. A girl slept under hospital lights. A mother held her daughter's hand. And a doctor stood by a window in the NICU wing, watching the machines blink and whir silent promises that some lives were still fighting to grow. The hospital was quieter now. In room 417, Lucia Halkin slept beneath warm blankets and constant monitor tones. A pulse oximeter blinked at her fingertip. Her belly was strapped in fetal heart monitors, 2 belts crisscrossing a body that still looked childlike. Each faint thump from inside her was a reassurance that, for now, her baby was still holding on. Outside her room, Dr. Evan Lamb stood at the nurse's station, thumbing through vitals on a chart. A few feet away, Daniela Rivera paced in nervous circles near a vending machine that wouldn't take her last dollar bill. She hadn't left the hospital since the ambulance arrived. "I should have fought harder," Daniela whispered. "I should have broken the damn restraining order." Lamb didn't correct her. He knew better than to hand out guilt when trauma had already settled into someone's bones. "She asked for you," he said gently. "Even after all these years." Daniela wiped her face. "She did?" Lamb nodded. She held your hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. Elsewhere, in Santa Rosa, the Halkin house had become something else entirely. Yellow tape fluttered across the front lawn. Crime scene markers dotted the path to the front porch. The blinds that once shielded the inside world were now lifted, exposing shadowy interiors and crooked furniture. Detective Morales and his team moved carefully from room to room. Every corner of the house whispered of order. Marco's need for control clung to everything, not just in the way the shoes were lined up in perfect rows by the door, but in how none of the living spaces had any evidence of a child's presence. No toys, no drawings, no posters on bedroom walls. It was like Lucia had been edited out of the home. She didn't live in this house, Morales muttered, scanning the master bedroom. She survived in it. One officer stepped into the basement stairwell, his flashlight cutting through darkness. "Detective," he called out, "you're going to want to see this." The basement floor was concrete, cold, unfinished. But in one corner, behind a rack of old camping gear and tarps, there was a wall that didn't match the others. The drywall was newer, unpainted, too clean. A narrow seam ran down the center, disguised as a storage cabinet. "Get me a crowbar," Morales said. Within minutes, the false wall gave way, revealing a space no larger than a walk-in closet. The light bulb inside was yellowed and low, but its glow was enough. Enough to see the mattress on the floor, the camera tripod, the shelves lined with labeled thumb drives, a bucket in the corner, and the walls covered in soundproofing foam. The smell hit next. Stale sweat, mold, desperation. Morales stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat. On a nearby shelf, he saw a child's hoodie red folded neatly next to a stack of journals. Lucia's name was scribbled on the spine of each one. "My God," one officer whispered. "He kept her down here." Back at the hospital, Detective Morales arrived just before sunrise. He met Lam and Daniela in the hallway. "We found a hidden room," he said, his voice low but even. "In the basement, camera equipment, personal effects, and files. A lot of files." Daniela's face drained of color. "How long?" Morales shook his head. "Years." "Was she in there when I was fighting the custody case?" "Yes." Daniela stumbled backward, catching herself on a chair. Lam stepped beside her. "Did you find anything else?" Morales nodded. "Journals. We'll need to verify if they're hers, but the handwriting's juvenile. Consistent. There's a pattern. Dates. Descriptions. She documented everything. The times he locked her in, what he said, how he punished her." Daniela was shaking now. She wrote it all down. "Yes. Which means we're building a case that will be airtight. He's facing a mountain of charges. But that also means Lucia will have to relive it. In court, in statements, on paper." "I want to see her," Daniela whispered. "She's awake," Lam said quietly. "But tired, processing. Let me be there when she talks." And the room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a sunrise trying to break through a foggy window. Lucia's eyes fluttered open. Her mother's hand was already wrapped gently around hers. "You're here," Lucia whispered. "I'll always be here now," Daniela said. "I promise." Lucia looked at Dr. Lam, who sat at the foot of the bed. She gave him a faint smile. "Did you see them?" He nodded. "I did." Lucia swallowed hard. "The room in the basement?" "Yes." Lucia nodded slowly. "That's where it started." What followed wasn't a full confession. It was fragmented. The way trauma always is. Lucia spoke in images. Memories. Pauses long enough to let pain echo before the next sentence arrived. "He said it was temporary at first, just until I learned to behave. Then he added the camera, said it was so he could keep me safe." She looked at her mother. "I begged him to let me go to school. He said the world was dirty, that it would ruin me." Daniela was crying now, silently, shoulders shaking. "I thought if I behaved, he'd let me out. But even when I did everything he asked, the door still locked behind me." Dr. Lam asked gently, "When did he start taking photos?" Lucia hesitated. "Before I turned 11. Silence. Daniela stood and pressed her forehead against her daughter's blank, "Hostin 17. You never have to be alone in that house again," she whispered. "Never. Back at the crime scene, another officer called Morales over. "We found an encrypted hard drive. Could be more files." Morales examined it. "Send it to cyber forensics. We'll break it." They also found court records Marco had printed and highlighted legal documents from the custody battle with Daniela, all marked in red ink with words like proof, leverage, control. "He never moved on from it," Morales murmured. "He made her pay for winning, even when she lost." One journal entry stood out. A date circled over and over. It was the day Marco was awarded full custody. Written below in childish cursive were the words, "I think today is the day I disappear." Back at the hospital, Dr. Vasquez entered Lucia's room with an update. "The baby's heart rate is stabilizing," she said. "The steroid injections are helping the lungs mature. We'll continue monitoring over the next 48 hours, but we're seeing signs of improvement." Lucia smiled faintly the first time her face had resembled a child her age. "I want to keep her," she said softly. "She didn't choose how she got here, but she's mine now." Daniela looked at her daughter and nodded. "Then we'll raise her together." Outside the hospital, morning had finally broken. For the first time in years, the light touched Lucia's face through glass that didn't have bars, locks, or secrets behind it. It was fragile, but it was beginning. A new life was blooming inside her and all around her. And the house that wasn't on the floor plan? That place that trap had been broken open. Now the world would see it for what it was. And maybe, just maybe, Lucia would never have to hide again. The story didn't stay in Santa Rosa. By the third day after Lucia was rescued, local headlines had already begun to circulate. "Teen girl escapes rooftop, standoff father arrested in abuse case." The words were sterile, sanitized. Just enough truth to rattle the neighborhood. Not enough to reveal the horror buried beneath it. But then the photos leaked. And the secret room. And the fact that the girl was pregnant 28 weeks with the father, identified as the biological parent. That's when the media storm began. And nothing could stop it. The Halkin house was now cordoned off by more than yellow tape. Satellite vans lined the block. Reporters knocked on every neighbor's door. Microphones were thrust through gates. Cameras rolled as local anchors stood with somber expressions, the house looming behind them like a haunted portrait. "Once an unremarkable suburban home," one reporter intoned, "now the center of a disturbing criminal case." Dr. Evan Lamb watched it all unfold from his front window. The news vans. The faces of neighbors staring in stunned disbelief. The Halkin driveway, once just another driveway, now seared into the public consciousness as a crime scene, a place where silence had festered into violence. Inside his home, Lamb sat at his desk, phone ringing nearly nonstop. Reporters, advocates, lawyers, strangers. Everyone wanted to talk to the man who had noticed what others had missed. But he didn't want attention. He wanted justice, and time, and space for a girl who hadn't asked for any of this. At the hospital, Lucia watched the coverage from her bed. They didn't use her name. They didn't have to. She recognized the rooftops, the backyard, the footage of her being loaded into an ambulance. She turned off the television. "I don't want the world to see me like that," she whispered to her mother. Daniela brushed her daughter's hair gently. "They won't. Not if you don't want them to. They see a victim," Lucia said. "But I'm more than that." "You're a survivor," Daniela said softly. "You're a mother now, too. And you're brave." Lucia nodded, but her eyes stayed focused on the black screen, her reflection faint and ghostly against the glass. At the Santa Rosa County Courthouse, Marco Halkin sat behind bulletproof glass, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, expressionless. His arraignment was scheduled for 9 a.m. Outside, protesters had already gathered. Some held signs. "Protect our daughters." "Justice for Lucia." "The monster next door." "M." Others stood in silence. Candles flickering in glass jars even in daylight. Detective Morales stood at the back of the courtroom, watching carefully as the charges were read aloud. 21 counts of sexual assault of a minor. 5 counts of incest. Possession of child pornography. Child endangerment. False imprisonment. Obstruction of justice. Attempted homicide. The courtroom gasped at that last one. Lucia's rooftop fall. The shove. The witnesses. It was enough. Marco's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The judge didn't flinch. No bail, she said firmly. He remains in custody. Meanwhile, the Child Protective Services investigation had entered its second phase. Rebecca Miller, the lead caseworker, visited Lucia and Daniela at the hospital daily, carefully documenting their interactions, home life, plans for the baby. "Lamb speaks very highly of you," Rebecca said during one visit. "Says you've prepared for this moment for years." Daniela nodded. "I've made mistakes, but I'm not the woman I used to be." Lucia spoke up. "She's my mom. She didn't hurt me." "He did." Rebecca nodded. "That matters, Lucia. A lot." They were quiet for a while. Then Lucia asked, "Will I have to go to court?" Rebecca met her eyes. "Yes, eventually. Not tomorrow, but one day. You'll be asked to give your statement, maybe face him." Lucia looked away. Not out of fear, but preparation. "Okay," she said quietly. "I want to do it." The next day, Dr. Lamb returned to the hospital for his afternoon rounds. Lucia's room was warm with low sunlight. A new drawing sat on the windowsill, a sketched image of a girl and a baby holding hands under a tree. "You did that?" he asked. Lucia nodded shyly. "I'm not very good." "You're wrong," Lamb said. "It's beautiful." She paused, then added, "Do you think she'll be okay?" Lamb sat on the edge of the bed. "I think she's got a fighting chance, just like her mom." "Oh." Lucia looked down at her belly. "I want to name her Hope." Lamb smiled. "That sounds right." Across town, reporters had begun uncovering more. Court documents from 10 years ago, Daniela's gambling charge, her loss of custody. But the tone was shifting, no longer painting her as the failed mother. Now, the media began telling the truth. A system that had handed a child to a man who would one day imprison her. News outlets began requesting interviews. Daniela refused. So did Lucia. But others stepped forward. Neighbors, teachers, social workers who'd once visited but never looked too closely. And with them came the guilt. "We always thought Marco was a little intense," one neighbor admitted on a local newscast. "But not this." "How do you live next door to a monster?" another asked, staring at the camera with haunted eyes. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a confession. 2 weeks later, Lucia was discharged from the hospital. The baby was still inside her. Still small, but stronger now. Doctors gave her another 4 weeks, maybe 5. Every day counted. At Daniela's small apartment, CPS gave the green light for supervised home care. Lucia had her own room, small but cozy. Painted lavender. A rocking chair in the corner. A crib already assembled, though empty. "She's going to be safe here," Rebecca said. "I know," Lucia replied, "because I finally am." That night, as the sun dipped behind the Sonoma Hills, Lucia stood at her window watching headlights pass below. A breeze blew through her open curtain. She closed her eyes. She listened. No footsteps on stairs. No locks clicking behind her. No voice whispering that she owed him love. Only silence. Only freedom. And a heartbeat beneath her hand, tiny, steady, strong. At a press conference the following morning, the district attorney announced they would pursue the maximum sentence for Marco Halkin. Given the photographic evidence, journal entries, testimony, and forensic records, the DA stated, "We believe this case represents one of the most heinous examples of long-term child abuse in recent history, and we intend to see justice delivered." Reporters fired questions from all sides. Will Lucia testify? What role did the physician play in identifying the abuse? Was CPS ever alerted previously? But the DA offered little more. "This is still an active investigation, and above all, our goal is to protect the victim." Outside the courthouse, Dr. Lamb gave a single statement to the press. No cameras. Just one microphone, held steady by a young female journalist. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just a neighbor who finally listened." He paused. "And maybe that's the lesson, that we have to listen harder, look closer, trust our gut when something feels wrong. Because silence doesn't mean safety, it just means the danger has more time to grow." He walked away after that. Didn't look back. Didn't need to, because the story was no longer his. It belonged to Lucia now, and to the future, she was already building one heartbeat at a time. The courtroom buzzed like an old light fixture, quiet, but charged. It had been 4 months since Lucia's rescue. Her baby was now 2 weeks old, born small but strong, with lungs that defied every ultrasound's warning. They named her Hope, just as Lucia had promised. A name that felt less like wishful thinking and more like defiance. But this wasn't a time for hope. This was the beginning of the trial. The state of California versus Marco Elias Halcon. Lucia wasn't in the courtroom for the first hearings. She didn't need to be. Instead, she sat in her therapist's office, a soft blue couch beneath her, sunlight dappled through Venetian blinds. Hope lay asleep in a bassinet nearby, her tiny fists twitching in dreams. Lucia held a notebook on her lap. It was the same color as the journals she had once kept in the basement, the ones she never imagined anyone would read. Now she was writing again. But this time, it was for herself. Across town, in a secure digital evidence lab, 2 cyberforensics experts sat hunched over a desktop screen, scrolling through thousands of files pulled from Marco's encrypted hard drive. They had cracked the password 2 days ago. It had been a string of letters and numbers. Lucia, 1108, love. Sickening. Inside the drive were folders sorted by year. Most had codenames meaningless to anyone but Marco. But one folder stopped the scrolling dead in its tracks. Daughter. Inside, 432 files. Videos, photos, audio recordings, diary entries Marco had written himself. Some dated back to when Lucia was just 9 years old. Detective Morales sat in the observation room as the technicians compiled a summary. He didn't need to view every second. The thumbnail images alone were enough to confirm the horror. But then, a file caught the team's attention, one that didn't fit the pattern. A video, dated the week before Lucia's rescue. File name, Last Resort. They opened it. The screen lit up with Marco's face. Unshaven, slouched in his leather recliner. The camera was handheld, slightly tilted. The lighting in the video was dim, and the audio hissed with static. Marco began to speak. If you're watching this, then I'm probably in jail. Or dead. Doesn't matter. You don't know the truth. You think I'm some monster. But Lucia, she loved me. She needed me. She was mine. Her mother didn't care about her. I gave her everything. I protected her from the world. Emsing, his face twisted with bitterness. And now the world wants to take her away from me. Take what's mine. He paused. Looked down at something, maybe a drink, maybe a photo. They'll say I hurt her. But what about what I gave her? What about the love no one else gave? The screen went black. Morales sat frozen. This wasn't just another confession. This was intent. This was premeditation. And it wasn't just sick. It was damning. At the DA's office that afternoon, the prosecution team gathered around a long oak table littered with legal pads, photos, and case files. This video changes everything, the lead prosecutor said. It's the final nail. Rebecca Miller from CPS nodded grimly. He never thought he'd be caught, but he still made a trophy. That's how deep his sickness went. What about Lucia? Someone asked. Does she know? She will, said Morales. But gently. That evening, Lom visited Lucia at her apartment. Hope lay asleep in a crib by the window. A white noise machine buzzed softly in the background. I need to tell you something, he said, settling into a chair. Lucia looked up from the bottle she was warming. They found a video, Lamb continued. A recording. Your father. He talked about what he did. Claimed it was love. Claimed he gave you everything. Lucia stared at him. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. He always told me no one else would understand, she said. That they'd think I was the crazy one. Or worse, that I asked for it. She looked at her daughter. I never asked for this, she whispered. But I'm going to use it. Use what? His voice. His words. To destroy him. 2 weeks later, the trial formally began. Lucia took the stand. The courtroom held its breath as she walked to the witness box, her frame thinner than most girls her age, her voice softer but steady. She took the oath, then faced the man who had stolen her childhood. He didn't look at her, but she looked straight at him. And then she began. She described the room, the mattress, the locks, The times he told her she was special. The first time he took her photograph. How he said it was art. How he rewarded her with food when she obeyed, and punished her with silence when she didn't. She described hiding the photographs not because she thought they'd save her, but because it was the only power she had left. And then, when the prosecutor asked if she could identify the father of her child, she didn't hesitate. "It's him," she pointed. Marco shifted in his seat for the first time. Not out of shame, but rage. He muttered something unintelligible and had to be restrained. Lucia didn't even blink. Later that day, the prosecution played the last resort video for the jury. Some of the jurors looked away. Others didn't. But every single one of them listened. To his tone. To the ownership in his words. To the justification of the unjustifiable. It wasn't just a monster's confession. It was the truth. Unfiltered. Indéniable. When the trial closed, the verdict came quickly. Guilty. On all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the courtroom exhaled. Lucia didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just stepped outside and looked at the sky. It was raining. For the first time in weeks. The kind of rain that washes everything. That night, she sat in the nursery, hope in her arms, rocking, humming. She looked down at her daughter's face, so small, so impossibly alive, and said softly, "You came from something broken. But you are not broken. You are my beginning." She kissed Hope's forehead. And for the first time since the basement door had closed behind her years ago, Lucia was free. The trial was over. The monster was behind bars. But justice, true justice, doesn't come with a gavel strike or a sentence read aloud. It comes later, in the quiet, in the spaces no one else sees. News of the conviction swept across California headlines by morning. Marco Halkin sentenced to life without parole. Teen survivor stuns courtroom with testimony. A town looks inward after years of silence. On talk shows and podcasts, commentators dissected how such a horrific crime could happen on a tree-lined street. Journalists re-aired footage of the rescue. Think pieces flooded online. About family court failures, about child custody loopholes, about predators hiding in plain sight. But none of it touched Lucia's day. Because Lucia had stopped reading the news. She had turned off the noise. She spent most of her time in the apartment now, nestled in soft clothes and low light. A baby swing in the corner, bottles drying on a rack, a shelf of donated baby books. Daniela had hung up one of Lucia's sketches on the fridge, a mother and daughter under a giant tree, hands linked, shadows long. Lucia had drawn that the night before the trial began. She hadn't drawn since. Now, she was learning something else. How to rest. How to trust silence. Once a week, she returned to therapy. Not because it fixed anything in a single session, but because it gave her permission to try. Some days, they spoke about dreams. Some days, about nightmares. But often they just sat in silence. And that was healing too. Hope was growing slowly but steadily. The pediatrician called her development resilient. Her immune system stronger than expected. She smiled when Lucia sang lullabies. She gripped fingers tightly. She looked for her mother's voice in every room. "You saved her," Daniela said once. "No," Lucia replied. "She saved me." But recovery isn't a straight line. It dips. It loops. And sometimes it circles right back to the doorstep of the past. It started with a letter, postmarked from San Quentin State Prison, Lucia's name on the front. Daniela found it in the mailbox. At first, she thought it might be another news outlet trying again. But no, the handwriting was unmistakable. Blocky, precise, controlled. Marco's. Daniela didn't show it to Lucia at first. She sat with it for hours, debated burning it or shredding it. In the end, she put it in a drawer. But the next day, Lucia found it anyway. She held the envelope for a long time. Didn't open it. Didn't ask what was inside. She just stared at her name written by the man who stole years from her life and said quietly, "I don't need to read it. He had my voice long enough. I'm not giving him my silence too. Ever too." Then she dropped the letter into the trash. The community that once looked the other way began changing. Santa Rosa held town hall meetings. Parent groups formed to push for new custody laws. The district attorney partnered with child welfare advocates to create a task force focusing on the identification of at-risk minors in homes that seem outwardly normal. Lucia never attended those events, but her story hovered behind every microphone, every call to action, every reform proposed. And then one day, she said yes to speaking, not on television, not in a courtroom, but in a high school auditorium, to a group of juniors and seniors, kids only a year or two younger than she had been when her abuse reached its peak. She stood behind a small podium. No notes, just her. "Most people think monsters hide in the dark," she said, "but mine made breakfast, mowed the lawn, said good morning to the neighbors. No one saw. But I tried to speak. With my eyes, with my silence, with my drawings. I was screaming, just not with words. So, if you ever see someone who's quiet, too quiet, don't assume they're okay. Don't assume that just because they say, 'I'm fine,' they really are. Sometimes the bravest thing someone can do is stay alive." Afterward, a girl approached her. Soft, brown eyes. Shoulders curled inward. "I think something's happening in my house," she said. Lucia didn't ask for details. She just gave the girl her hand and a number to call. Later that night, back in her apartment, Lucia sat by Hope's crib. The moonlight poured in through the slats of the blinds, casting soft shadows over the walls. She whispered a lullaby one her mother had sung to her as a baby. Hope stirred but didn't wake. Lucia watched her daughter's chest rise and fall. Safe, warm, free. Daniela stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You ready?" she asked. Lucia nodded. "Where are we going?" Daniela smiled. "Nowhere. Just forward." And with that, they sat side by side, mother and daughter's daughter. 3 generations breathing the same quiet, steady breath. No locks on the doors. No basement beneath their feet. Just the slow, stubborn return of peace. Morning light spilled across the sidewalks of Santa Rosa, soft and gold like it was trying to apologize for the darkness. A breeze stirred the hedges lining the street where it all began, where a girl once sat in a red hoodie, eyes fixed on the floor, not saying a word. Today, that same girl walked the same street. But she wasn't hiding. She wasn't hunched or trembling. She walked slow, with her daughter in one arm and her mother just a few steps behind. And for the first time in years, she was going home. Not back to the house where it happened. That place was gone now. Sold, emptied, then quietly bulldozed. The city called it a safety hazard. The neighbors called it a blessing. No one mourned its loss. A hollow foundation remains there, now fenced off, silent. Just grass and ghosts. But Lucia wasn't walking toward that house. She was walking toward a new one. A small white cottage across town. A symbol of something the world had nearly taken from her. Permanence. The front yard was overgrown just a little, the grass uneven, a few wildflowers pushing up along the edges. Daniela fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the door, and the 3 of them stepped inside. It was quiet. Too quiet at first. Lucia paused at the threshold, holding her breath. Hope cooed softly in her arms, and the sound broke the spell. She smiled. "Let's paint the nursery yellow." Daniela nodded. "Yellow it is." Upstairs, the windows were big and bare, open to sunlight. No locks on the outside. No bars. Just glass, breeze, and the sound of birds in the distance. Lucia stood in the room that would become Hope's, her fingers trailing the edge of the window frame. And for a moment, she remembered the room in the basement, the foam walls, the metal door, the mattress with no sheets. Her chest tightened. But then Hope sneezed a tiny, high-pitched hiccup of life. And the memory shattered. Replaced by presence. Replaced by light. A few weeks later, Lucia sat in a quiet coffee shop, nursing a peppermint tea, her daughter asleep in a stroller beside her. Across the table, a young reporter adjusted her microphone. She had been gentle, respectful, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure you want to talk on the record?" she asked. "We can keep it anonymous." Lucia shook her head. "I've been anonymous long enough." The reporter clicked her recorder on. "Let's begin then," she said. "Why now?" Lucia's eyes drifted to the window. Outside, a little girl walked by, holding her father's hand, skipping. Lucia didn't flinch. "Instead," she answered, "because my name is Lucia Rivera. I'm 18. I'm a mother. I survived something that tried to end me, and I'm still here." The reporter blinked. "Do you want to tell the world what happened?" Lucia smiled. "Number, I want to tell them what I did after." In the months that followed, Lucia began to write again. Not journals, not courtroom statements, but stories. Stories about girls who ran, but didn't run forever. About locked doors that didn't stay locked. About monsters who thought no one would see, and the people who finally did. She titled the collection Rooms Without Locks. It would be published by a small imprint that focused on survivors' voices. The proceeds went toward shelters and education programs. She never read the reviews, but she read the emails. Dozens at first, then hundreds. From other girls, other mothers, people who had kept secrets too, and finally saw theirs in someone else's words. Detective Morales stopped by the hospital one day with flowers and an envelope. Lucia opened it at home. Inside was a photo. Her in the courtroom standing, not seated on the day she testified. She looked older in the picture, stronger. There was a note on the back. "For the record, you didn't just testify, you towered." She placed the photo on Hope's bookshelf, right between the children's books and her first pair of shoes. Hope grew fast. Too fast, Lucia often thought. She smiled early, crawled early, would likely walk early too. At night, when she cried, Lucia didn't rock her with panic. She rocked her with purpose. Not because she had the answers, but because now she had a future. On Hope's first birthday, they invited just a few people. Dr. Lamb came. He brought a tiny stethoscope plushie and a book called Brave Little Bear. He stayed for cake, and as he left, he hugged Lucia for the first time. "You saved her," she told him. "No," he replied. "You gave me a reason to act. That saved both of you." 1 year turned into 2. Then 3. By then, Lucia had taken courses in child psychology. Started volunteering at a local shelter. She gave talks to nursing students about how to spot trauma. She started training hotline volunteers. She never said her father's name. Not once. Because he didn't belong in her story anymore. One day, while sorting boxes in the attic of the cottage, Lucia came across the ultrasound printout Dr. Lamb had given her, the one she'd clutched that first day in the clinic before the rescue. It was yellowing at the edges. She framed it, hung it beside a photograph of Hope at 3 years old, sitting in a pile of garden soil, hands muddy, grin wide, a tiny wildflower crown slipping off her head. Lucia captioned it in marker, "Something still grows here." And on quiet nights, when Hope was asleep and the world outside their home fell still, Lucia would stand on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind in the trees, to the creak of the wooden steps, to her own steady breath. She no longer feared the silence, because she had filled it. With her voice, with her daughter, with a life reclaimed not in defiance of the past, but in ownership of what came next. Because monsters don't always come with fangs. Sometimes they live 3 houses down. Sometimes they hold your hand. Sometimes they name you property and dare you to speak. And sometimes you do. And your voice, just a whisper at first, becomes the sound that tears down walls. One room, one truth, one girl at a time.